Dallas, Texas, the spring of 1973. A Saturday morning in a hotel ballroom on Commerce Street, 4 blocks from the Adolphus Hotel, in the kind of room that convention centers keep for events that need more floor space than a conference room and less ceremony than a banquet hall. The chairs had been cleared from the center and stacked against the far wall. The carpet had been covered with interlocking foam mats that ran the length of the room in 2 parallel rows, 20 feet wide and 40 feet long. At the front of the room, a portable podium had been set up with a microphone that was not being used because the man teaching the seminar did not need a microphone. His voice carried without effort, the way voices carry when the person producing them has spent years speaking to rooms and has learned to fill space with projection rather than volume. His name was Chuck Norris. He was 32 years old. He was 5 feet 10 inches tall and 170 pounds, and he had been a professional martial arts competitor for 9 years and had won the World Professional Middleweight Karate Championship for the previous 3 years running. The seminar had been advertised in 4 Texas martial arts publications and in the regional insert of Black Belt magazine. 312 people had paid the registration fee and had arrived that morning from across Texas, some of them having driven the previous evening and stayed in Dallas hotels, and some having risen before 5 to drive in the same morning. They had come from Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, and from as far as Amarillo and Lubbock, and the driving said something specific about what the seminar meant to them, which was that it was worth the driving, that the instruction available from Chuck Norris on a Saturday morning in a Dallas hotel ballroom was worth the hours in the car, and the hotel bill, and the time away from families and schools, and the other Saturday morning obligations that serious practitioners accumulated over the years they had been training. They were a serious crowd: tournament competitors, dojo owners, senior students, a handful of men who had been training since before Chuck Norris had his first black belt. They had paid to be in this room because the man teaching it was the most respected tournament karate competitor of his generation, and because the gap between watching someone compete and watching them teach was worth crossing for the right instructor. The seminar had begun at 9 in the morning. It was now 10:40 in the morning. Chuck Norris had been teaching for an hour and 40 minutes without a break, moving through the material with the organized precision of a man who had prepared carefully and was executing the preparation rather than improvising around it. The 312 people on the mats were engaged in the focused way that serious practitioners engage when the instruction is good. There were nods. There were the sounds of partners working techniques and stopping and working them again. In the back of the room, near the stacked chairs, 12 people had set themselves up along the back wall and were working in the reduced space available to latecomers. One of them had arrived 40 minutes into the seminar. He had come in through the side door. He had paid at the registration table. He had found a space at the far end of the back row and had begun working the material quietly with a man beside him. Nobody in the room knew he was there. John Wayne was 55 years old that morning. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall and 250 pounds, and he was wearing the clothes he had driven in: a plain canvas jacket over a dark shirt and dark trousers, and the boots he wore when he was not working. He had driven up from Waco the previous afternoon on Highway 35, a drive of 100 miles that he had made in his own car without a driver, because the drive gave him the specific kind of time that driving gives, which is time that belongs to no one and requires nothing from the person occupying it except the use of their hands and eyes. He had driven up from Waco the previous afternoon, where he had been visiting a friend who had been ill for several months and who had asked to see him and whom he had not seen in more than a year. He had spent the evening at the hospital and had driven into Dallas at 9 that night and had slept at a hotel on Commerce Street and had woken early and had walked to the hotel across the street for coffee and had seen the sign outside the conference entrance that said Chuck Norris Karate Seminar and had paid the registration fee at the table without giving it any more thought than a man gives to a door that is interesting and stands open. He had been training in karate for 6 years, beginning in 1967 when he had watched a demonstration at a charity event in Bel Air and had said nothing to anyone about what he had seen and had found 3 weeks later, through a contact of a contact, a school in Encino with an instructor who did not trade on the names of his students and was not interested in doing so. He had been training there twice a week ever since, in the specific private way that he did most things that interested him, without announcing the interest to people who would have made an event of it. He trained at a school in Encino twice a week with an instructor who understood that the arrangement required discretion and had provided it without being asked. He had a second-degree black belt. He had never competed and had no interest in competing because competition was not what the training was for. What the training was for was harder to articulate, and he had not tried to articulate it to anyone. But it had something to do with the specific satisfaction of working at something physical that did not care who you were, that could not be charmed or performed for or managed, that required only the consistent application of honest effort over a sufficient period of time and produced, in response to that effort, an equivalent amount of knowledge about what your body was capable of and how it moved and what it needed. He had found almost no other domain in his professional life where that transaction was available, where the work and the result were in such direct proportion, and where the result was not mediated by any of the machinery of fame and attention that mediated everything else. He had never competed. He had come to the seminar not as a celebrity, but as a practitioner, in the same way that he had come to everything that interested him, which was by showing up and paying the fee and sitting in the back and working. At 10:42, Chuck Norris reached the back wall. He had been moving through the room in the systematic way that he moved through rooms when he taught, covering the full space and not spending more time with the students near the front simply because they were easier to reach. He believed that the students who arrived late and took positions at the back had paid the same fee as the students who arrived early and took positions at the front and were owed the same quality of instruction. He reached the back wall. He had been moving through the room as he taught, stopping to correct a specific student's technique, demonstrating a detail at close range for a pair who had a question, keeping the room working while he circulated. He moved along the back row from right to left. He corrected one man's footwork. He moved to the next pair. He reached the far end of the row. He looked at the man on the left side. He looked at the man's partner. He looked back at the man on the left. He stopped, not dramatically. The specific stop of a man whose movement has been interrupted by information that requires a moment to process. He looked at John Wayne for several seconds. John Wayne looked at him. He said, "Good morning," in the same flat, direct tone he used for everything. The tone of a man who has been recognized in 1,000 rooms and has developed, over decades, a specific way of acknowledging the recognition that neither inflates nor deflates what it means. Chuck Norris said, "Good morning." He said it in the voice of a man who has just understood something he did not expect to understand. He had known John Wayne trained in the abstract sense of having been told, once, by a mutual acquaintance in Los Angeles, who had mentioned it the previous year in passing. The way people mention things, they assume the other person already knows, and that the other person does not particularly retain, because the information has no immediate context to attach itself to. In passing, the way people mention things, they assume the other person already knows. He had not known what that meant, practically. He had not known which school or which instructor, or how many years or what level of seriousness the interest represented. The information had sat in the back of his awareness the way pieces of information sit when they have no immediate use and no way to be verified. Not forgotten, but not active either. He had not known what level. He had not known whether the interest was serious, or the kind of interest that public figures develop in things they will practice twice and abandon. He was looking at a man who had been working quietly in the back row for 40 minutes. He could see, from the way the man moved, from the position of his feet, and the economy of his weight transfer, and the specific way he received his partner's technique, that the interest was not the kind that gets practiced twice. He said that he had not seen Mr. Wayne's name on the registration list. John Wayne said he had given a different name. He said it without elaboration, the way a man explains a practical decision that required no justification. Norris looked at him for a moment. Then he did what serious teachers do when they find something in the room worth using. He raised his voice and asked Mr. Wayne if he would demonstrate the previous combination for the class. He said it as a request rather than a command, in the tone of an instructor who has just discovered a resource he did not know he had. The 312 people on the mats turned toward the back wall. John Wayne stepped to the center of the cleared space that formed as people moved back. He did not adjust his clothing or prepare himself in any visible way. He simply walked to the center of the space and stood with his hands at his sides and his weight even on both feet, and waited. Chuck Norris named the combination. John Wayne executed it once at half speed and once at full speed, and once against the man who had been his partner, at the resistance level the seminar had been working at. What the 312 people saw was not what most of them had expected to see when Chuck Norris asked the man at the back of the room to demonstrate a combination. What they had expected, what the reasonable expectation would have been, given who the man was a competent amateur performance. The kind that a famous person produces when they have been working at something for a few years and are proud of the progress they have made. What they saw instead was a man 6 feet 4 inches tall with 40 years of film behind him, moving through a karate combination with the specific, unhurried precision of someone who had internalized the mechanics so completely that the performance of them required no visible effort. It was not the precision of a beginner who has learned to move correctly by drilling the movement until correctness becomes habit. Beginners who have drilled correctly produce a specific kind of precision that is recognizable to anyone who is trained long enough to see it. The precision of someone who is executing a memorized sequence and monitoring themselves against the memorized version. What John Wayne was producing was not that. It was the precision of a man who had moved past the monitoring stage into something that no longer required monitoring, where the movement and the awareness of the movement had collapsed into a single thing. It was something past that. It was the precision of a man who had spent 6 years asking his body questions and had arrived, through the asking, at something that looked less like technique and more like the absence of unnecessary movement. The room was quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something being demonstrated is more than the demonstration was expected to be. Chuck Norris watched. He had been teaching for 3 years and had developed the specific ability to see what a student's movement revealed about the quality of their training. What John Wayne's movement revealed was that the instructor in Encino was doing serious work, and that the man in the back row had been a serious student of it. He said, when the demonstration ended, that he appreciated Mr. Wayne's willingness to work in front of the room. He said it in the even, informational tone he used for things he meant. John Wayne nodded once. He walked back to his position at the far end of the back row. He picked up where he had left off. The seminar continued. Chuck Norris incorporated what the demonstration had shown him into the remaining portion of the morning, adjusting 2 technical details of the combination based on what Wayne's execution had revealed about where his own description had been slightly incomplete. He did this without comment, the way good teachers adjust in real time without announcing the adjustment. The 312 people who had been on the mats that Saturday morning drove home to Dallas and Fort Worth and Houston with something they had not driven in with, which was the specific piece of information that a man who had spent 30 years playing cowboys and soldiers and lawmen on screen had been spending his Tuesday and Thursday evenings in a school in Encino, working to understand, with the unhurried seriousness of someone who had no audience for the work and no reason to do it except that it interested him and he was not going to do it poorly. The information traveled through the Texas martial arts community in the slow, specific way that surprising information travels through communities of people who understand its significance, which is not the way that ordinary information travels, which is fast and broadly and with progressive distortion, but the way that information travels when the people carrying it understand that the information deserves to be carried carefully, person by person, low voice to low voice. With the specific care of people passing something fragile between their hands. The information traveled through the Texas martial arts community in the slow, specific way that surprising information travels through a community of people who understand its significance, person by person, low voice to low voice, the way real things move. Chuck Norris did not speak about that Saturday morning publicly for many years. When he was asked about it, eventually, by a journalist who had heard the story from someone who had been in the room, he said that the most useful thing that had happened that morning was not the demonstration, but the 40 minutes before it, when a man nobody in the room recognized had been working quietly in the back row and had given no indication, in those 40 minutes, of being anything other than a serious practitioner who had come to learn something. He said that what the 40 minutes demonstrated was not technical skill, but the specific quality of mind that makes technical skill possible, which was the willingness to be a student in a room where nobody knew you were anything else, and the willingness to stay in the back row rather than announce yourself, and the understanding that what you are doing when nobody is watching is the truest version of what you are. He said that the 40 minutes before the demonstration were the lesson. The demonstration was just the confirmation that the lesson had been learned.